The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mack Rosenberg. I'm the General Counsel of Children's Health Defense. We have a great show for you all this morning. Thank you again for being with us. I am going to have a conversation with Dr. Brian Hooker, our Chief Scientific Officer here at CHD, about an exciting project that's one of our newer projects here called the COVID Index. And then I'm going to have an interview with Cherie Nuttall in the People Study. And then we'll have Dawn Richardson with the Advocacy Lifeline talking about pro-medical freedom candidates who need your help. So first, I'd like to bring on Dr. Brian Hooker. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning.
So we're gonna
okay, there we are.
There we go.
Good morning, Kim. How you doing? I got my coffee. Polly's away, so all of us get to play TV, right?
That's right. So we're going to turn the tables a little bit this morning. I am hosting the show today, obviously, but Brian is really going to interview me about the COVID Index and a lawyer's perspective on it, as well as the scientific perspective. And Brian, can you tell us a little bit, for those who aren't familiar with the COVID Index, what it is?
Well, sure. The COVID Index, if you go to covidindex.science, this is a web resource that Children's Health Defense is hosting. And it really is a very, very unique and it contains the uncensored information regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. And it looks at the things that you would just not normally find on, in scientific literature like PubMed or the ISI World of Science or in the mainstream media. And so this is indeed the largest searchable directory. It is a growing directory because we have volunteers who actually add information, curate information, and then give it to Mack Rosenberg, who makes sure that we're legal and we're following copyright laws at the same time. So Kim, we're thankful for you. But one of the resources that is featured front and center in the COVID Index is the legal aspects of COVID-19. And so there are different things that have been curated that aren't just science. They're not just the science and medicine around COVID and about what COVID happened, but there were many, many legal issues that came up during the COVID-19 pandemic. And Kim, why don't you speak to those? Why don't you speak to sort of the legal aspects of the COVID Index?
Sure. So I think that the COVID Index generally is a phenomenal resource for anyone who's looking for information, because it is organized in a very searchable format. There is a topics page that people can go to and delve deeper into different topics. As Brian said, we're trying to be as compliant as possible about copyright. And so sometimes you'll have an abstract there. You may have the entirety of an article. And it brings together, a lot of the things that are in here are on PubMed or are peer-reviewed literature, but you'd really have to sort of hunt and peck for them and maybe hopefully hit the right search on PubMed to be able to find it. This brings everything together, but it does cover a number of topics that are very, very much related to the law. So for example, censorship. This has been a major area that Children's Health Defense has been focusing on, really, frankly, out of necessity for the past 4 or 5 years. And in fact, even before COVID, there was some censorship and shadow banning and other things going on with respect to CHD. And, the fact checkers were already doing their work even back in 2019 and maybe earlier than that. But COVID really ramped things up. And so organizations like Children's Health Defense and individuals were censored. They were deplatformed. They were shadow banned. They were removed completely. So CHD has been removed from Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and other social media platforms, because we were speaking out and sharing information that in many, many instances, in fact, I would say most, if not all, were the truth. But we just weren't allowed to share them because they countered the popular narrative that the government and others were trying to put forward. So censorship is a critical topic to talk about. And it's not just organizations and individuals, generally speaking, but also doctors were censored incredibly. So that brings our legal world and the medical scientific world together. And we've actually supported cases of a number of doctors who had their ability to share information either with the public or even with their patients disrupted by those who wanted only the popular narrative shared. And this really impacts doctors' ability to provide individualized medical care to their patients in a way that they think is appropriate for their patients.
Exactly. I live in California. We had AB 2098. I'm so thankful for the legal work that was done in order to really squash that. And, even though it ended up passing our legislature and was almost signed into law, and if it hadn't been withdrawn and it hadn't been the work of legal and individuals like Dr. Aaron Kheriaty, then we would have taken away First Amendment rights for doctors talking to their patients. What are some of the other things, weaving through the COVID-19 pandemic, it was just another sea of acronyms, alphabet soup, EUA, PrEP Act, CPIP. What are some of the other things that can be highlighted and that you can look into in that sort of acronym world that the government seems to thrive on within the COVID index?
Right. So you named a number of them, and those all sort of play in the same sandbox, right? The
Right.
emergency use authorization for the COVID vaccines and use of drugs such as remdesivir as what they call a covered countermeasure under the PrEP Act. So the PrEP Act essentially offers liability protection for most individuals and entities associated with the administration of what they call covered countermeasures. And those are things like remdesivir, like the COVID vaccines, ventilators. So it's not just medicines, it's a number of things that fall under the PrEP Act. But once a product falls under the PrEP Act, it's almost impossible to achieve any sort of compensation or justice if you're harmed. So if you are harmed by one of these products, you have to go to what's called the Countermeasures Injury Compensation Program, CICP. It is sort of Medicaid for harms because it's the payer of last resort. So you can only recover in CICP if you've suffered a serious injury, and that's a limited, it's a defined term, and things that you may even think are serious may not fall under the serious injury. But you can't recover. It's not just a damages free-for-all. It's you only cover what hasn't been covered by your insurance or other sources of funding. So you may be left with copays and deductibles if you get compensation, because most people don't get compensation. You have to file within a year of receiving the covered countermeasure. And then it's unlike the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, Brian, which you and I both know has its fair share of problems, but
Right.
there is a hearing process there, and you can have a lawyer there. You can hire a lawyer for CICP, but the program won't pay for it. And there's no hearing. So documents essentially are submitted and they go into kind of a black hole, and you wait to hear. But to get a case out of CSIP is very, very difficult. We have one case that we're supporting, Watts against the Department of Defense, right now, where we are still fighting in court. It's so rare that the courts themselves don't really know the process they're supposed to follow. So they've made procedural errors in that case. For example, you're supposed to have a 3-judge panel that decides motions. And the Department of Defense's motion to dismiss was decided by 1 judge. So that's been sent back for re-adjudication. So it's so rare that they're not even sure what processes they're supposed to be following.
It's absolutely incredible. And when you look at the CICP, and you look at the damage that was obviously done by COVID countermeasures, you would think that they would, that there would be things like table injuries. A table injury is something that we're familiar with in the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program because we know that it's reimbursable and we know that it happens. But, we know that the COVID-19 shot, I don't necessarily want to call it a vaccine, but shot is associated with cardiac issues, is associated with pulmonary embolism, deep vein thrombosis, myocarditis, pericarditis. But yet you still have to go through this adjudication procedure for all of those. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's not, to my knowledge, a table as there is in the VICP, as you just mentioned. And what happens after the cases are reviewed and if they are compensated, there is data available on the Health and Human Services and the HRSA website that shows you which cases have been compensated and in what amount. It, obviously the identified data, it's not telling you who was compensated,
Right.
but you'll see that most of the compensation amounts are very, very small. $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. There are a few that are larger, but by and large, you have what are serious injuries, because those are the only injuries that are compensable. And those injuries are being compensated, again, because it's essentially the Medicaid of the injury compensation world. They're only paying charges that for treatment that was medically necessary. So you're not getting coverage if you're trying a treatment that may be considered alternative or complementary or that is experimental. It's only medically necessary treatments that what they consider medically necessary treatments that they're covering, and only where the amounts that they're paying haven't been paid by somebody else.
Well, and this is the type of index information that we want to catalog on the COVID index. Like I said, it's a living document or a living repository of documents. And our COVID index team of volunteers is always adding more information to the COVID index. It's not just science or medicine, there's legal documents as well. Kim, talk about the emergency use authorization. That's one of the tabs that I saw under topics. And, there's so much that was so wrong regarding the emergency use authorization. How is this, first of all, let me tell you, I don't get to talk to lawyers very much. I'm always talking to scientists. So we need to extend this program by about 20 hours because I have that many questions. But regarding the EUA and the Pfizer itself. Talk a little bit about what went on with that, especially with there was so much confusion because it was being mandated as a product. I don't even know if that was legal. And then second of all, then Pfizer came in with its approved entity called Comirnaty. Was this all kosher?
No, I don't think it was. And we could spend 20 hours talking about this, and it would be great maybe to have a roundtable sometime of other lawyers as well who have been involved in this. But emergency use authorization was essentially a way, and there are emergency use authorization law and regulations, query whether they were followed the way they should have been. But what it essentially does is allow you to short circuit a lot of the processes and protections that are in place for the introduction of, in this case, what they were calling a vaccine, into the market for public use. So we know now, going back and looking at some of the clinical trial documents, for example, that there were things that went on and concerns that were raised that the public was never made aware of. All the public who, much of the public just heard that this was safe and effective.
Right.
And really That's not what the trial showed. The trial showed some very significant harms and very significant concerns. Everything from myocarditis and pericarditis to reproductive issues. We've seen a lot, unfortunately, of women who are pregnant having miscarriages and stillbirths following COVID vaccination, for example. We have a case where we represent a whistleblower at a California hospital concerning this very issue, and the uptick in the number of women coming in post-vaccination and losing their babies was tremendously higher than it had been prior to the pandemic. So the emergency use authorization was really, again, it's a way to get around the protections that we have in place. And we can talk about why there are even concerns about the process to approve and license a product like an mRNA injection, generally speaking, or any injection or vaccine. There are issues with that anyway, but this was, much a shorter cycle, and the information was not made public.
No, absolutely not. And given everything that happened during the pandemic, I know there's lots of COVID fatigue. A lot of people may not want to look back and do a quote unquote postmortem on the entire COVID-19 pandemic. But why is it important that we do take that look back? And I guess as a corollary of that question, what are the laws that are still maybe in effect that still need to be rolled back from COVID times that could come up and subject us to issues that aren't relevant to, current day life? And how do we avoid this from happening again?
Well, and I think you're absolutely right. People do have COVID fatigue, or people think, well, COVID's over, quote unquote, over.
Right.
And so we don't need to worry about this anymore. But there will be another pandemic or another epidemic that appears. And we still have things like the PrEP Act that's on the books. That is a law that something else comes along, and we can have other products that are emergency use authorized, and we can have other things that are covered countermeasures that are subject to that CICP and that offer liability protection to the manufacturers and the distributors and those who administer these covered countermeasures. So we need to be mindful of that. And we sort of saw that there was, a couple of years ago, I think, sort of a failed attempt to make monkeypox, or what they renamed Mpox, sort of the next thing we should be scared about. And there will be other things that come along. So I think that people need to be very, very concerned about that. And we still have, some protections that are in place related to protections of the government and others in place now that are good for several more years related to COVID itself. So people need to understand that while it appears to be over in everyday life, we still have to be mindful. And I think we need to look back at lessons and understand what lessons we can learn. So the censorship issues, for example, most people didn't know what they didn't know because of censorship, right? How do you make an informed decision about whether or not you want to take a particular drug or receive a particular treatment if you don't have the information you need? And again, when we talk about medical freedom, it's the freedom to choose or to refuse a treatment. But if you don't have the information, you're not making a truly informed decision for yourself or for a loved one.
Exactly. And that's why, I think that having this repository of information is so vital. I also want to include a little commercial for our volunteers. We have volunteer finders, and I guess we call them research associates, and they actually find the information and they help curate the information that goes up on the COVID index. We want to make sure that it's not just something that just popped up on the internet that we're putting on willy-nilly, but this information is sourced, it's fact-checked. We want to make sure that we're not breaking any type of copyright laws by putting it up there. So we rely on our research associates, and if you want to help, there is a want to help tab. And being a research associate, you give the amount of time that you're able to give. We love our associates. We want to make sure that they have fun doing it. We have a whole COVID index team. And I think that if there's a party in the house, it's a COVID index that's probably partying. I've attended some of their meetings, and mostly meeting, but a lot of goodwill, a lot of good fun. And so if you're thinking about joining the COVID Index and you want to be a research associate, just go click that Want to Help tab in the COVID Index, and we would love to have you join us. Kim, thank you so much. I will relinquish my my chair as guest host for the day.
Thank you so much, Brian. And I do want to second what Brian said about the research associates. They're such an integral part of making the COVID Index work and making it the valuable resource that it is. So I encourage people to just go check out the COVID Index, search for topics that are of interest to you. There's a lot of information there for people to delve into. And we share as much as we can right there. We provide links to materials. And if you are interested in volunteering, happy to have more volunteers to continue to grow this project. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining me today.
All right. Thanks, Kim.
And now I'd like to bring on Cherie Nuttall, and we're going to talk about her family's experience in the People Study segment. Cherie, good morning. Cherie, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. Good morning.
Good morning, Cherie. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So tell me, you have a son who's about the same age as my own son, 25.
Okay.
And tell us what happened to Nathan.
Well, he is the second of three of my sons, and he had 4 years of beautiful development, 90th percentile for everything. He was talking, he was potty trained, he was writing his own name, he was imaginative, he played with his brothers. 4 years of that, which he has lots of family, lots of friends. We go to church. There were lots of witnesses to his regression, his severe regression. He received, well, in November of 2020 or 2004, he had an ear infection, a double ear infection, and he went on antibiotics. And I went back to the pediatrician to make sure it had cleared up, because he didn't often get sick. So I just wanted to make sure it cleared up. And we were behind on his vaccines, and there was an MMR that, according to the schedule, he needed to have. So she gave him the MMR. And that week, he started changing. He lost his appetite. His whole demeanor changed. He was fussy, crying, and he didn't talk. He didn't want to eat. He lost his appetite. It was the weirdest thing. In his face, you could see it. And I'm like, what the heck is happening? And I remember the week after the vaccine, I'm like, okay, something's wrong. What could have possibly happened? And the only thing that I could think of was he had a vaccine. And I called, but he didn't have any fever or anything. And so I called and asked the pediatrician or the nurse that answered, can a vaccine make my son act weird? Because he's crying, he's fussy, he's not eating, his whole demeanor had changed. And the only question the nurse asked me was, does he have a fever? He didn't have a fever. But there was something wrong. And within 3 weeks, well, a few weeks later, my dear sister-in-law Julia was getting married, and she was getting married in San Diego. And I had to stay in the hotel room. I couldn't leave my son with a babysitter because he was so fussy. It was the weirdest thing. And and
So
everyone
you
was like,
just
"What's wrong?"
you noticed a really abrupt shift
It was a really
in
dramatic
him.
shift. Yes, it was very dramatic, and we didn't know what it was. And he handed me his cup, and instead of saying, "I want some juice, Mom," he said, "Ju na na na." What is that? My son, you saw the, well, there's more pictures of him. He was just so photogenic, so engaged. And then he started eating dirt and having gastro problems. All kinds of issues. A boy who didn't need to ever see doctors had an ENT doctor, gastro doctor, uh, neurologist, just everything. He had to see, all his whole life was doctors and hospitals. And anyway, and so that was within 3 weeks of the vaccine. I couldn't attend a wedding. And within 2 months of the vaccine, he was self-harming. And within 5 months of the vaccine, he is diagnosed with childhood disintegration disorder. And no one knows what that is. But what had actually happened is that he had a case of encephalopathy, but he didn't get a fever. But there was encephalopathy, and it damaged both sides of my son's limbic part of his brain that handles emotions and all basic functions, communication, everything. And one day he was in the hall. It was a few weeks after that picture was taken. And he said, it was like the clouds had cleared. And he said, "I need some medicine, Mom."
So he had this little moment of
Yeah, it was
complete
like the
clarity.
clouds cleared. It was like the clouds cleared and he could speak. And every once in a while he would do that. And he did that. And then he started, within the second, third month, he started having manic cycles of, giddy, happy, laughing, no external stimuli to make him laugh. Okay. And then all of a sudden, without any warning, without anything, he would just start crying very hard, and sometimes self-harming. Within months, he was self-harming.
How long did it take to get the encephalopathy diagnosed?
Oh, well, his MRI wasn't read correctly until 7 years later. And so one thing that I would really like to encourage people to do is, if they have a child with any kind of issues with the brain, or probably anything, get a second opinion, because radiologists aren't trained to always look at the difference between children's MRIs and adults. They're different, and they missed it. But you can tell the difference. The brain damage spread to both sides. And so it was horrible. And so 5 cycles of manic depressive, and oh gosh. And it was within months of the vaccine, I had to put him in a bicycle helmet to protect his head. It was so horrible. What happened to my son? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm so sorry that your family is going through this. And Nathan is now 25. Is that correct?
He is, well, but he went through the vaccine injury compensation program. He was on the Hazelhurst case. Okay. He was one of those. And Curtis Webb, the lawyer on file, he fought for Nathan for 12 years. And we met all of the requirements. He should have won. And I spoke to Curtis just the other day, and he said that, that ruling, Nathan's case, was the worst case that he had his whole career. That's the one that makes him sick inside, because it should have passed. And this whole program, well, okay, I don't want to get off on the childhood or the.
Well, no, I mean, and I think we can say, that the vaccine injury compensation program has many, many problems. We know this, and, we at CHD have covered it.
Yeah.
extensively, including the Hazelhurst decision that you just talked about, but particularly for families with individuals with autism. That program has really failed those families. Creating the omnibus autism proceeding and putting all the families. Were you part of the OAP?
Yes.
Yeah.
But then Curtis kept fighting for my son all those years. And it's rigged.
So
you can't win. You have to be like Indiana Jones going in, finding a treasure to come out with it. It's just, you can't win. The vaccine injury program is just for pharmaceutical companies to hide behind, but that's my opinion.
And what a lot of people may not know, a lot of our viewers probably do know, is that when you're in that program, you're not suing the pharmaceutical company that manufactured the vaccine. You're suing the Department of, they have liability protection. You're suing the Department of Health and Human Services. And the program is funded by a tax on every vaccine that's administered in this country. So we have to wind up, but can you tell us how Nathan is doing today?
Well, he's doing all right, but the second worst thing that has happened to him after the MMR is his treatment by the medical community, his dental oral care. Okay. When he's 19, when kids turn 19, they can't go see pediatric dentists or oral surgeons anymore. And cute little hospitals, they decided, oh, we're not going to let disabled adults who function like children, they can't get help in hospitals anymore. And that led to my son. My son was, anyway, it led to several different torture periods of his life where, because I couldn't get help for his oral care, he ended up in 4-point restraints for 3 to 4 weeks in a hospital because they would not help him with his teeth, just doing a sedation and helping him with his teeth. And he ended up with MRSA in ICU with a collapsed lung, not expected to live because they wouldn't help him with his teeth. And I visited his foster mom 2 months ago, or no, I'm sorry, not 2 months ago, just a few days ago, and to just catch up with her. And she is caring for another disabled adult who's 30 years old, who came to her 2 years ago with 4 abscessed teeth. And she currently has, still 2 years later, 4 abscessed teeth. And all they will do for her is get her to give her antibiotics when she gets a fever and put her on Tylenol. And so these children are being tortured, and the hospital policies are horrid.
Right, these hospitals and dentists and other medical professionals often don't know how to appropriately address issues in individuals who have, whether it's autism or another disability. They don't know how to treat these individuals, and as a result, you're not getting the care you need. You're getting mistreatment sometimes, and it really is a travesty that just piles on the challenges you're already facing. Because I can't imagine for Nathan or this other young woman you talked about being in such severe pain and not even being able to advocate for yourself, really, to get appropriate treatment.
And to have snide, rude medical professionals with PhDs be so incredibly cruel. And I won't name the hospitals that I'm talking about right now, but the policies have to change. They're torturing people and they're killing people, okay? Because you have an infection in your mouth like that. How many people could go 2 years with 4?
No, of course not. And just in wrapping this up, I think, people should be aware, as I'm sure you are, that your dental health affects your whole body. It's actually a really important indicator of whole body health, so that these...
And it needs to be covered. And while, of course, not all dentists and oral surgeons can care for these disabled people, the hospitals shouldn't be able to say, oh, we are just not going to help these people because they're the only facility that is equipped to.
Mhm.
Okay. And so their cute little policies need to go. Okay. They shouldn't be able to torture people the way they are. And it is torture.
Cherie Nuttall, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and Nathan's story with us today. And now I'd like to turn the show over to Don Richardson with the Advocacy Lifeline. Don, how are you today?
Hello, my name is Dawn Richardson, and welcome to Advocacy Lifeline. You're live here on CHD TV. Thank you so much for joining us today. The purpose of this show is to empower you, our viewers, to use your voice to affect change in law, policy, and public opinion through education and action for issues that are important to you and your family. None of this, what I'm going to tell you today, should be construed as legal or medical advice because it's not. It's my opinion, and they're not my opinion is not necessarily the views of CHD or the National Vaccine Information Center, where I work full-time as the Director of Advocacy. Well, I am so happy to be back. I have been out since mid-September. My sweet dad had his third stroke, and my husband and I have had to adjust to providing total care for him. As I've mentioned before on the show, my dad's first stroke was right after his first 2 doses of the mRNA Pfizer vaccine. The man had no other risk factors. It's been awful. He's had 2 other strokes. Now he requires total care. We have to suction his mouth. He can't even swallow. We have to feed him through a feeding tube. He is immobile. We have to get him up out of a hospital bed to put him in a wheelchair upright. He can't do any mobility by himself. And I know many of you out there have family members that have suffered as well from these mRNA shots, and my heart goes out to you. This is a travesty, and I pray that those responsible are held accountable so that they can't ever do this to anybody ever again. They need to be stopped. It's just terrible, but we're adjusting and we're getting on with things, but you know, it's a bit hard. But I will say that I just had a wonderful weekend at the CHD Moment in Truth conference in Austin, Texas. It was just like about 2 weeks ago, and I was fortunate enough to be able to spend some time with the chapter leaders on Friday before the conference got full down. And what a wonderful group of people. We did some training there on how to effectively talk to legislators. And I promised, and I will do this before legislative sessions get full underway in the states, I will bring some of that training onto this show so that y'all are ready and primed to be as effective as possible during the legislative session starting in January. So I wanted to share that. Today, I am going to be talking about an expansion of what I talked about to the general crowd at the conference on Saturday. And because it's so important, I wanted to bring it to everyone in this country that can see this. So I am passionately urging everyone out there not to wait because your pro-medical freedom primary candidates need your help now. We are at a critical point and have an incredible opportunity to change things for the better for generations to come. But it's going to take some work from everyone who wants true medical freedom and to eliminate vaccine mandates from their state. Election primaries are coming up very soon, from late winter to early spring. These are right around the corner, and filing deadlines for candidates are almost here. Primary elections are the elections where the voters in their respective political parties determine which candidate they choose to put on the ballot in the general election in November. The most important message I want to relay to all of you is each and every one of us needs to take on the goal of making sure the best candidates possible are on the ballot in 2026. Here's the deal. You can have the best bills in the world or the best arguments even against a truly awful bill. But if you don't have good legislators sympathetic to the issues you care about in place, it's very hard to make any kind of meaningful progress. So I just want to lay out what's at stake here in the 2026 election. At the federal level, all 435 districts in the U.S. House of Representatives and 33 seats in the U.S. Senate are up for election. For state executive offices for election includes 36 governor seats, 30 lieutenant governor seats, 30 attorney general seats, and 26 secretary of state seats. And at the state level, in the 50 states, there are actually 99 legislative chambers altogether. I will mention that Nebraska only has one chamber, the Senate. It's a unicameral legislature, but all the other states have two bodies, usually a House and a Senate, or if it's not a House, it is Assembly or something similar, but two sides. Now, across 46 states, 88 of these chambers are holding regular legislative elections in 2026. And the reason that it's only 46 states instead of all 50 with elections is that the states of Montana, Nevada, North Dakota, and Texas only meet every other year in the odd years. So they are not included in the state legislative elections this year. But I want to stress, it's very important. They have important candidates in statewide and federal races that need your attention. So the general election for all these races is November 3rd, 2026. And I know that seems a long way off, but here's the deal. The problem is the candidates that get on the ballot for November are not often our best choices. Well-funded candidates from organizations opposing the positions we personally take on health policy have a huge advantage. But the good news is we have the power to change that. And I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to do. But first, I want to bring on the show a state legislator from Ohio who is the House sponsor of the Idaho Medical Freedom Act, which eliminates medical mandates, including those for vaccines. I'd like to welcome back on our show today, Idaho State Representative from the 8th District, Rob Beiswanger.
Hi, Don. Don, thanks for having me on. And I'm from Idaho, not Ohio, but I'm sure Ohio's a nice place. But
my notes say Idaho. I apologize.
No,
yes, I know you're from Idaho. I said the Idaho Medical Freedom Act. I apologize. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get into stuff, because I know we have a lot of new viewers, can you please share with our viewers a little bit about yourself and how you came to be involved as such an advocate for medical freedom?
Well, I'll try not to carry on too long. My mom had cancer, years ago, and we struggled to find treatments for it. It was ovarian cancer, and she passed away not too long after I left college. But during that time, you kind of just got a sense that the federal agencies, RFK kind of talks about they're captured by industry, and you realize that the whole medical establishment was kind of geared towards one type of treatment, and not just a bias, but really extinguishing, almost other forms of treatment, which might have been preferred or better for some people, including my mom. And then after that, got married, and my wife and I opened up a business working with kids with autism. And so we really got to see and talk to parents, firsthand about, what was happening to their kids and with vaccines. I was always kind of skeptical of the vaccines myself. I just didn't really felt like I ever needed them. Going through college, they were offered and I just declined them. And but then as my wife, we were talking to these parents like, hey, we went in, had a shot, and then the pushback on the parents once they were telling their story was kind of remarkable to me, that their own family members would put them down for talking about these side effects or question whether they should get more vaccines, even though their child had clearly been injured by something. And I don't really see why that shouldn't have been on the table here for these guys. So, family members push back, and and then of course, when someone went into like the media, tried to talk about it, that issue of vaccine injuries, you just saw all the retaliation come out, across the board. Every newspaper and radio station in the country all of a sudden had an article about how it's totally irresponsible and dangerous, maybe even to question vaccine safety or efficacy. And so that really got me going for a long time, and then kind of broke my heart too. But and it's always so the health freedom issue has been on my mind for a long time, and was never really interested in running for office. But then the COVID thing hit out here, even in Idaho, and the school here out in my district, which, it's a small town, and they tried to offer, and they did offer the COVID shot to the students there. And they said, hey, if your parents don't want you to have this, we won't tell them about it either. And I just kind of I was really just stewing, this can't be happening. We're in a good, country, conservative town here. This seemed way out of place for rural Idaho. We live about 20 miles north of Boise, up in the hills or the mountains. And so so I went to my state rep and I talked to her about it. And she's like, yeah, we really need to change the law there. The way the law was written was more to deal with regular medications, not controversial, new, gene therapy, vaccine kind of stuff, right? So it's more not the law as written wasn't really intended for a situation like this, but was being abused by the school. And well, then my state rep said, look, actually, I'm going to run for this other seat. Can you run for my seat and you can try and fix the issue yourself? And I was so, upset at the time. I actually agreed to do it. My wife thought I should do it. My, people I worked with, kind of agreed with that. So I took it on. I ran the race. I fell short the first time. I got 47%, but I made a nice stink on my issue and I felt pretty good about it. And then the opportunity came back to run a second time against the same guy. And I won the second time around, and then was able to get in the legislature this year and start championing the issues, that were important to me and my motivations for running.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that. I especially wanted to just have people take notice, because as we go through things today and talk about these primary elections and who the candidates are, the filing deadlines have not passed in the states yet. There is still time to file. I know it seems like it's a little bit late, but, as Representative Weiswanger just said, he didn't win the first time, but he learned a lot and he was primed and ready for the second time. And I've seen that happen a number of times. Sometimes you just have to just throw yourself in. After today's show, if you go through what we talk about to look at the candidates and you don't see somebody you like, well, guess what? Look in the mirror. There may be a future for you. The medical freedom movement has really, really benefited from people in this very same situation. And I invited you on, Representative Weiswanger, because of something you told me a while ago that really struck me. It was right after the Idaho Medical Freedom Act passed. And we were talking about how Idaho had a lot of good bills before. I've been covering them on the portal since 2010, but they've had very little success. And then something happened to the composition of the legislature, and it changed that, opened the door. I want you to talk more about that. What happened to the composition of the legislature and, the percentage of people that were elected and how things were changed, and what kind of impact that had on this session?
Yeah. Well, so I understand that in the last two elections here between 2024 and 2022, you basically had half the state legislature has new, legislators, new electors in there, right? So 50% or over those two terms, past those two terms, and 50% is kind of new, right? So it's a whole new group of people in there. And the people elected, most of them during this last 2022 and 2024, largely ran over COVID style kinds of issues, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, lockdowns. This would be, almost all of them, would be their personal motivation to combat this. Obviously other things on taxes or education issues and other things too, but this would be the driving motivator for a lot of them. So when the medical freedom bill came up and the other bills we were working on in these things, people were thrilled to have it done, and they're very excited. So, kind of like you said earlier, it's I could have the best floor speech or the worst floor speech. In some ways, maybe it didn't really matter because we had the votes built in coming in there. We were the bills kind of sailed through, and where before they'd faced some resistance. Some of the old guard had knocked it down in committee, or they tried to water down bills in past years. But this time, I think everyone knew, top on down, that we were going to get this done. Our caucus, both especially in the House, was determined, to make this a reality. So we had a lot of good members, fighting for these issues.
It's so important to have good people in there. And a lot of people think that you just wait until November, you go and you pick, one of your 2 or 3 candidates, if there's an independent or another party, and then you pick then. But as I just mentioned, those candidates are often not the best candidates for medical freedom in a lot of states. And that work has to happen well before the election. It has to happen before the primaries. And what I want to share with you today is I want to show you how to find the information you need. You're going to need to know the filing deadline for your primaries so you will know when all of the candidates who have announced to run are officially registered to run, so you know all of the ones to call. You're also going to need to know the primary election date, and you put that on your calendar. And I want to stress, if your state has early voting, not all of them do, take advantage of it, because things can happen on election day that prevent you from going to the polls. You're also going to need to know the type of primary that you have in your state, because some of them are open, some of them are closed, and you need to know the rules around it so you can see which candidates you're eligible to vote for. I also want to say that it's really, really important to help friends and family understand this information, and we will get into that here in a little bit. But for illustration purposes, I'm going to have our wonderful producer, Lou, step you through using a website called ballotpedia.org. And we're going to go down a bunch of things here, and I want to have him go ahead. So if you go to ballotpedia.org, go ahead and write that down for yourselves, because it's a good nonprofit website. It's nonpartisan. It has good information on it. But just like the name says, it has information on what's on your ballot. And I want to step you through. So on the left-hand side, you can see where it says 2026. First of all, on the left-hand side, go on 2026 elections. So you can go ahead and click on that. It's right there. And then I want you to scroll down. And but first, before, I just want to say that on here, you're going to see a list of all the different levels of elections that are happening. You have congressional elections, state executive elections, state legislative elections. There's even elections for judges, your local elections, and ballot measures. Those are things that go on the ballot, like deciding if you're going to amend the Constitution or other things. And all of those are listed here. But let's just, for an example, go ahead and choose 2026 state executive elections. So that would be like your governor, your lieutenant governor, your attorney general. These are state level executive offices. Scroll down to on the ballot, and you'll see here. So this will be, it has all the states listed, and you can pick a state, and then you can see all the state level offices that are open. So let's just go ahead and click on Texas. That's my state. And here you're going to see that for the governor, right at the top, it talks about the primary elections there, and it shows the primary election is on March 3rd for both parties, but the filing deadline is December 8th. Guys, if you want to run, some of these filing deadlines are coming up, so you want to know. I know this is all the way for the November 3rd general election, but the important reason for knowing the filing deadline is because after that point, all of the candidates that are going for this office are going to be listed. So if you scroll down a little bit more, you're going to see that all the candidates right there for the Democrat candidates for governor. And then scrolling down a little bit more, you'll see the Republican candidates for governor, and you'll see that it'll have the incumbent officer and then who's challenging. And so there could even be more that announced before the December 8th. But here's what, you can take these names and you can go find their campaign pages. You can go to their your Secretary of State website and find their contact info. They'll usually have a phone number when you can call them. And I want to say that you can do this for every single seat that is up available. So I would do it for like the really important things to you. You're going to want a good governor, and you're going to want to call and ask, Would you sign a bill that would eliminate medical mandates and vaccine mandates? Would you sign a bill that does that? If their answer is no, ask them why not. Tell them why it's important to you. You know, if you're going to contact your attorney general candidates, you might want to ask, hey, are you going to defend us from any federal overreach in the future? Are you going to fight for the people of this state to have medical freedom? Ask these types of questions. You know, and for state legislators, the same thing. Would you be willing to sponsor or co-sponsor a bill to get rid of vaccine mandates or medical mandates? Would you support a bill that would you vote in favor of it? Would you be willing to put your name on the bill? Types of questions like this, you can find out. Tell them what issues are important to you, and then that's where you go ahead and you ask them. So I want to also have our producer go ahead back to the 2026 election tab, and I'd love to have you scroll down to the map showing, scroll down to primary elections by state at the bottom. There we go. And then go ahead and scroll down to the map. Okay. This map, and if you just scroll up a little bit, you'll see the color key there. Okay, great, perfect. This is showing all the different types of primary elections that are in the states. They're open primaries. You'll notice that Texas has an open primary, the blue color. What open means is that anybody, regardless of party affiliation, can vote in either primary. And sometimes people will do that, like if there's a really strong candidate, no challengers in their party of choice, they might go and vote in the primary of the other party to pick the least offensive candidate to their cause. So there's different strategies there. In close primaries, you have to identify with your party, and then you get to vote in that primary and choose your candidate. And semi-closed have some different rules. Then there's top two or variation. I'm going to talk about this for an instance. Look at California, what they do in their primaries, and it's just made things miserable there, is they will take the top two vote getters in the primary, and those are your candidates. So there's no balance. So when you have a state that heavily leans one party, the other party is basically stomped out and doesn't even have a chance to run. And then you get this one size fits all, this uniparty type of mentality where outside views are not even considered and bills are dead on arrival, and you just get a lot of bad legislation. And that's what's happened. That's kind of one of the things that has destroyed California, is this top two type of a primary. So, you know, that was changed, and things have gone downhill since then, in my opinion. Of course, these are all my opinions. So here's what I like to personally do before the primary election in my state, and it would be great if you can all do the same. And I'm going to ask Representative Beiswanger in a second, you know, some of the questions he might ask some of the candidates, so he can be thinking about that and springing this on him. But I'm getting call each office of the candidates I'm eligible to vote for, and I do this. This is the time where you want to talk to them to gain your vote, and because you have their attention. They want your vote, so they're going to take your call. They're going to talk to you. This is a time where prospective legislators are very willing to be on the phone or have a meeting with you because they want your vote. Tell them you're trying to decide who to vote for and what positions are important to you. Explain these to them and ask them, put them on the line, ask them for their position on these issues that are important to you. And like I said, would they support a bill that would get rid of mandates? So once you find your favorite candidate for each race that you're eligible to vote in, that you want to get involved in, pick some of these races to help your favorite candidate to make sure they win in the primary election, to secure their party nomination to appear in the ballot in November in the general election. So I want to ask Representative Beiswanger, so when you're trying to figure out who to vote for, you know, besides your own race, you know, obviously, but for the other candidates, what are some of the questions you would want to ask some of these candidates, you know, for some of the different offices that's important to you, just so people can, you know, get a different perspective from what I said?
Yeah, I mean, you cover it pretty well. I mean, I would say questions, and you're right though that people, when you're running for office, you get a flood of phone calls coming in saying, "Hey, this issue is really important to me." That triggers like, okay, this is an issue that I need to be sensitive to. I need to keep an eye on. So, I mean, if you had, just not just one person, but if let's say 50 emails or phone calls on a health freedom issue, that, "Hey, I'd like you to oppose if you get elected as vaccine mandates or medical mandates or banning vaccine mandates for schools or something like that," like that would definitely get their attention. And I mean, the emails and the phone calls really what drove the medical freedom bill through. So yeah, I would ask things like that. Do you think there's would you support a bill like Idaho had where you can't be forced to take a medication against your will? Would you support something like that? And would you support? Do you think schools should have the right to force someone to take a vaccine as a condition of going to school? Do you think someone should have to take a medication as a condition of going to work? Those kinds of basic kind of issues there. And then, and some of it, you just kind of want to let more than the specific question, you let them know this is important to you. It's important to other people. You're active on it because it definitely gets your attention because, there's all kinds of issues people run on. The few things they talk about as their reasons for running, which may or may not be health freedom kind of stuff. It might be, education bills. It might be, tax issues or just, bureaucracy kind of stuff that they're involved in. So you always want to kind of be in their ear a little bit to say, hey, here's stuff that's important to me, to this, to the area and the district and that kind of stuff. So it really is helpful. I mean, really, people do keep in touch, and the activists, I would say, do win the day typically. And if you don't say something, then a lot of us will say down there, it's like, well, no one ever said this is important, and then so nobody said anything. Like we could have addressed something, but then no one said anything, so now we can start working on it now. But so yeah, just being in touch at all is very helpful, I think, and it'll help sort of reinforce the idea this is a politically popular issue here. And I think that's what I think should happen here now, is you've seen the Maha movement moving across, is that the health freedom is something to grab onto. It's politically popular. So now more people are going to want to be thinking about it, be pushing it, and going forward. It's not just something that's like, well, I'll take the position, but it's going to be a political disadvantage for me. And I think that's what we want to communicate too, is I think that a lot of people who jump on it, I mean, the medical freedom bill got really hot here in Idaho. I mean, just even after signing the bill, the governor did, I was around the district afterwards, and people were like, wow, that was awesome. Like they were really excited for it. So I think that's something we can lean into on a political side, not just good public policy, but something politically be good for candidates to support.
I agree 100%. And you can even take some time to go to the candidates' web pages, because they're going to have their issues, and maybe they're already on there as supporting medical freedom. And maybe they're not. Maybe they're going to focus their campaign on some other areas critical to the district, but you don't know until you ask where they stand, and letting them know it's important to you, and tell them all your friends think this is important too, and your friends vote, like let them know this is important, because sometimes they just don't know how important it is to people within the district. So once you identify a really good candidate that's on the ballot for the primary election, you want to help them. It's so critical. I just want to say, like in the primary elections, maybe 20% of the registered voters get out there and actually vote. So these contests are decided by a low percentage of people who are eligible to vote. So you really can make a difference. And so here's some ways that I personally have tried to support my candidates that really mean a lot to me, where I want something changed. I will do something as simple as put up a yard sign. Now, I will typically volunteer to go and pick them up, so they don't have to take campaign time or volunteers' resources to come and drop them off. And I'll ask, is there anybody near me that has requested a sign recently? And I'll pick them up and I'll go drop them off for them. So it's a small thing I can do. All of us can do that, even though we're busy. I've hosted a coffee or a meet and greet in my house. I usually do it in my living room. I'll invite a candidate to come over, and I'll invite my neighbors to come, to be able to go face to face. Those face to face interactions can really shift things. When you're there in person, it's easy to get mad at someone over a website or get excited over a website. But when you look them in the eye and you're asking them where they stand on these issues, and they have an answer that really resonates with you, then maybe you can convert some of your neighbors to be able to be supportive supporters and help as well. So those meet and greets are really good, especially for the down races state level, district level and below. It's not likely you're going to get the governor to come out to your house, but maybe if you have a big enough house, they would. I don't know. I know it happens, but I've never hosted anybody that high. But also I've sent texts and emails to neighbors and friends like right before the election. I tell them the primary election's coming up. It's on this date. Here's polling, link for the polling locations. Here's who I support and why. And I often get phone calls and texts or emails back thanking me for doing that homework for them. These races are not as widely advertised and in the news to get people to get out there. So the more people you can slant towards the candidates that you're favorable for, then their vote even counts more because there's less people getting out and vote. So here's a chance to really make a difference. And of course, they're sending in a financial contribution. And before I asked Representative Beiswanger some of the things that has been helpful for him in his race, I did want to mention that yesterday I interviewed an Alabama State House District 96 Republican candidate, Danielle Duggar. She's a big medical freedom candidate. That's a very big issue for her. And the Alabama primaries for state legislators are held in May. And I asked her to share what are some of the other things that she's finding helpful to help with her campaign, and what are some of the things that she could pass on to others to help candidates that they like. And here's some of the things she said. She said volunteer door knocking was good, not necessarily asking people to do the knocking, but just going with the candidate to keep them company, or even driving them, kind of like the way parents drive kids on Halloween for trick-or-treating so they can just go up to the door and they're not having to walk in between everything. That can be very helpful, and then they can focus on their visits. Poll greeting is important. That's where, states have laws where you have to stand a certain number of feet away from the polling location, but holding up signs, wearing a t-shirt on election day to kind of remind people, hey, this is a candidate that's good. There's people out here supporting them. It shows support. So that's good. Sign waving is another thing where on public properties where you're able to, like a week before the election, stand, hold up a sign, a banner or something. And of course you want to look at your local ordinances and make sure you're not violating anything. But another thing that she said that was really helpful is phoning 10 friends and asking them to vote for your favorite candidate. Just get on the phone with the people you're close with that are in the district and just say, hey, I'm just reaching out. I feel really passionate about this candidate who's running for such and such a race. Here's some of the great things that they're standing for, and I'd really appreciate it if you could get out and vote on, March 3rd or whatever the date the primary is. If you need a ride, I'll drive you. And here's why. That personal reference, sometimes people just don't know. And getting the reference of a trusted family or a friend that is taking the time to actually call you and talk about it, that can do a lot. She also said, if you're a business owner, consider putting up a sign at your business and to show support. Also, talk to your church and ask them to host a meet and greet. If a candidate is in line with some issues that are important to that church, maybe they would have a meet and greet for the community. And usually most of the people who attend that church locally are in the district. You can forward social media posts on your social media from the candidate, or you can write your own posts and tag their campaign webpage. If you're good at organizing, volunteer to be a volunteer coordinator. You might not want to do any of those things, but you're really good about signing people up and assigning them tasks. That's helpful as well. And then as far as the donations go, of course, there's always financial contributions. And Danielle said that sometimes people think that if they can't afford a large donation, that it isn't worth for them to donate, but that is totally not true. People don't realize how important the small $20 or $30 donations are. Incumbents are sometimes well funded by political action committees, and they're getting big donations. And it's difficult for a challenger to compete campaigning with so much less money. But the small donations can really add up. If you can if you could have 100 people give $20, sometimes that's more money than a PAC donation would be. And so, don't discount. If you just have a little bit to give and you really feel passionate about a candidate, show show that support. It's really good also for other voters to see. Sometimes the candidates will push, they've got, all these independent personal donations rather than big PAC donations, because they have to file with their ethics commission, and that stuff is all public record, how many of these donations come in. And that's important for people to see. So, I know I covered a bunch of stuff, Rob. What are some of the things that you found really helpful when you were running, especially going up in the primaries or just for the general election, where people helped that that really meant a lot to you?
Yeah, I mean, a couple key things. I think the donations helped. I was at a grassroots funded campaign, and no, not everyone's going to max you out at $1,000. Plenty of people send in smaller amounts. Well, that helps pay for some of the mail, some of the internet ads, some of the gas, honestly, just driving around and stuff. But one of the things that happened in my opponent's hometown was a lot of the local folks got out there. They took my flyer that had printed up, and then they went door to door, actually doing some of the door knocking themselves, and just handing out the flyer and just saying, hey, please consider this, when voting. And so actually when I came door knocking kind of behind them, like a couple of days later on stuff, they're like, wait, didn't you come by before? I'm like, no, this is my first time here. Like, oh, well, someone came by like Monday. And then, you kind of build up that level of enthusiasm saying, here's a lot going on here. Not only am I knocking, there's other people here knocking on their own. Each of those little things put together kind of makes campaigns work. There's not one silver bullet or one thing that this do one mailer or this thing or phone call makes it. It's all kind of a combination of it. And if everyone kind of does their part, is how it works all together and gets a winning, candidate. So if you stay home and don't donate and don't get active, then it's harder for a candidate to win, especially someone who's a challenger, taking out an incumbent.
Yeah, that is so true. And I guess you can always, call the campaign office and say, where do you need the most help? If you're really liking this candidate and wanting them in office, you can just kind of have it open-ended. Where do they need your help the most? And then see where that goes. But I just don't want people to think, I know economically things are kind of pressed for a lot of families right now. They're worried about being able to afford holidays with their families. And don't think that if you can't really afford a lot, that it doesn't matter. The small donations matter. And even if you can't donate, but you can spend some time calling some people, doing things, everybody has a role. So that was my whole point of this show today, is to say you can't wait till November for the general election, because you're not going to always get the best candidates. You've got to get involved in the primary process. You don't have to spend money to do it. You can help. And because of the low percentage of people that get out there and vote, you can make a huge difference. Some of these district races for state rep, it's like 4,000 to 6,000 votes that determine it. And, if you can get it's like the total number of people who vote. And sometimes I have seen races won on one vote. When you say one peer person makes it, I have seen it happen. They've gone through 2 or 3 recounts to get to that. But so if you can sway 20 or 30 people in your neighborhood or some of your family and friends, that could be the difference in an election for a good candidate to be on the ballot and to win out over this special interest PAC money that's determined to, make sure that pharma can stay in control and not have people in control of their health. So that's really important. Rob, before we wrap up today, I just want to ask you if there's anything else that came through your mind when we were talking about these different things that you wanted to share today.
I just stay active, get involved. I mean, really the personal, effect on candidates is big. So if you get involved, calling them, emailing them, doing whatever you can it's appreciated, as a legislator, the help. And also I think this issue will keep going forward, and we've all got to do our part here, every one of us has our own role, kind of like you said, whether it's a meet and greet or running for office or a little donation. We all have our bit to play here. And if we all do it, it'll keep working. And right now we're winning, and we really need to capitalize on the momentum here. And so I'd really love to see 2026 as a big push that this is an issue that we're going to, require our elected officials to be good on. And if they're not, might be looking for somebody else.
Exactly. So everyone can do your part. Hey, do your homework, figure out the candidates, call them, tell them what's important, find the good ones, help them in the ways that we talked about, and let's get things going so we can make a difference for generations to come. Representative Beiswanger, thank you so much for coming on today. We really
pleasure.
Appreciate it. Take care, and
we'll
have you on again sometime soon. Take care, and good luck with everything.
Looking forward to it.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Yep. Bye-bye. So just want to say one more time, if there aren't any good choices out there, consider running yourself. Those filing deadlines are posted on the links that we showed you, ballotpedia.org. So please share this show with others, especially people out there that are interested in making a difference. They're ready for change. Really important for them to get educated on these issues. You can go to the CHD TV website under shows, pick Advocacy Lifeline, copy the link to this week's show and share it. Also, please consider signing up at nvicadvocacy.org so that you can get information on legislation once it is filed, so you can support the good bills and oppose the bad. Please consider donations to CHD TV and NVIC so we can continue this important work, getting you this great information that we do outside of this show. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being with us today. I'm thankful for all of you. I hope next week we're off. We are here every 2 weeks. So I'm wishing all of you a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we'll catch you back here in 2 weeks on Wednesdays at 10 o'clock Eastern time, 7 o'clock Pacific time, AM. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. God bless y'all. God bless America. Take care.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.